Tonight we begin with a development that intelligence officials, military analysts, and diplomatic insiders had feared, anticipated, and quietly prepared for. An announcement that unfolded not over weeks of negotiation, but in a single televised address. A single address that froze diplomatic channels across 3 continents. A single address that sent oil futures surging within minutes. A single address that forced emergency meetings in Washington, Tel Aviv, and Riyadh simultaneously. What Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei did today crossed a line that Western powers had hoped would hold through the current round of back-channel negotiations. And when that line broke, the United States and its regional allies did not hesitate. They responded with speed, clarity, and a level of coordination that signals something much larger is now in motion behind the scenes. What follows is the full breakdown of what happened and what it means for you. For months now, there had been signals, not from official Iranian state media, not from formal diplomatic channels, just whispers, patterns, and subtle shifts in military posture that Tehran was preparing something unprecedented. Iran has been aggressive, yes, but they have been calculated in their aggression. Their moves have followed a certain rhythm, a predictability, almost a choreography that Western intelligence agencies had learned to read and anticipate with reasonable accuracy. But what set off alarm bells in Washington and across European capitals this week was that the rhythm went silent. Analysts who monitor Iranian military communications, satellite movements, and political messaging know the indicators well. The sudden repositioning of naval assets in the Strait of Hormuz. The unusual increase in encrypted communications between Tehran and proxy commanders. The quiet mobilization of air defense systems near nuclear facilities. The sudden disappearance of senior military figures from public view. All of that went quiet in the last 72 hours. And whenever Iran goes quiet, it means something is about to get very loud. Intelligence professionals have learned this pattern over decades of watching Tehran. Silence from Iran is never peaceful. It is preparation. It is calculation. It is the deep breath before a move that changes the dynamics of an entire region. And today, that silence finally broke with 3 words that no one expected to hear from the supreme leader. Early this morning, Iranian state television broadcast what officials described as an extraordinary address from the supreme leader, including language and demands that had not been used publicly in over 2 decades. Khamenei appeared before cameras in Tehran and announced 3 specific demands that he said must be met before Iran would consider any path toward ending current hostilities. These are the kinds of demands that Iran only presents when they are signaling something very specific to the world. The first demand was the complete and permanent lifting of all economic sanctions imposed on Iran since 2018. The second demand was the full withdrawal of all American military personnel and assets from Iraq, Syria, and the broader region. The third demand, and this is the one that made intelligence officials pause, was international legal recognition of Iran's right to enrich uranium without any external oversight or limitations from any international body whatsoever. Observers in Washington, London, and Jerusalem did not know whether these demands were genuine negotiating positions, strategic provocations designed to test Western resolve, or the opening moves of a much larger and more dangerous escalation. But what they did know immediately was that Iran was changing its posture. And when a state actor of Iran's size and capability shifts posture without warning, even by the smallest measure, every intelligence agency in the Western world pays very close attention. The response issued by the White House tonight was not normal. It was not routine diplomatic language. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Senior officials, after an emergency National Security Council meeting, described Iran's demands as provocative, destabilizing, and perhaps most importantly, consistent with any framework that could lead to genuine peace. But strong words only work if the target hesitates. Iran did not hesitate today, and neither did the United States and its allies in their response. In fact, the coordinated response from Washington and its partners today was among the most rapid and forceful we have seen in this region in over a decade. Here is what we know so far, within hours of Khamenei's broadcast. The Pentagon ordered the immediate deployment of additional carrier strike group assets to the eastern Mediterranean. These were not routine naval exercises. These were advanced combat-ready battle groups, systems and platforms that the United States only deploys when they are preparing to project serious force. Tonight, defense officials confirmed that Allied forces launched a series of enhanced surveillance operations over key Iranian military installations, including a facility near Isfahan that had recently been upgraded and expanded for what analysts believe was advanced centrifuge testing. Coalition aircraft conducted reconnaissance passes before Iranian air defenses could fully activate their newly deployed systems. They monitored facility after facility. They tracked communication networks that were likely preparing to coordinate proxy responses across the region. In other words, the coalition targeted the intelligence infrastructure behind Iran's announcement. The command networks, the communication relays, the coordination systems that would have made any Iranian escalation operational and dangerous. This is what made the White House warning so urgent tonight. Iran's demands were not just symbolic rhetoric for domestic consumption. They were actionable. They represented the kind of strategic positioning that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in the Middle East if left unchecked. And the United States, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically and with precision. They did not strike Iranian territory. They did not target civilian infrastructure. They reinforced Allied positions in the Gulf. They activated intelligence sharing protocols with Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. They sent a message that was impossible to misinterpret, even through the fog of geopolitical posturing and propaganda that surrounds every move in this region. And here is where the story becomes even more significant. Intelligence analysts now believe that Khamenei's announcement was specifically designed to test the resolve and unity of the Western alliance after months of political division over the war in Gaza and growing war fatigue among European populations. Iran wanted to see whether the West would fracture under the pressure of three maximalist demands. They wanted to see whether Washington would hesitate or defer to diplomatic process. But instead, the exact opposite happened. The United States did not hesitate. The coalition did not fracture. The response was so swift, so coordinated, and so precisely calibrated that even Tehran noticed. You do not get Iran's attention easily. They are masters of strategic patience and long-term calculation. But today, Washington and its allies got their attention in a way that has not happened since the early days of this conflict. The message was unmistakable, and it was delivered without ambiguity. Defense analysts speaking with international media under strict anonymity described Iran's demands as a pressure play, a calculated attempt to exploit perceived Western weakness and divisions at a moment of political transition. But the coalition proved today that they remain both united and capable of rapid, decisive action. Their movements were not only fast, they were coordinated so precisely that Allied assets were in position before Iranian state media had even finished broadcasting the supreme leader's full address to his own nation. That detail matters enormously because it shows something critical. It shows that Western intelligence had anticipated this move before it happened. It shows that the alliance is not reacting to Iran. They are anticipating Iran. They are reading Tehran's moves before Tehran makes them. And that level of intelligence superiority is the one thing that keeps the balance of power stable in one of the most volatile regions on Earth. Iran knows this, and today's events confirmed it publicly. As reports continued coming in throughout the evening, we learned more about the full scale of the Western response. Naval forces repositioned across 3 strategic waterways, reinforcing freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. Air assets increased surveillance flights over Iranian proxy positions in Syria and Lebanon. That had been quietly reinforced in the last 30 days. Cyber operations reportedly disrupted communication networks used by Iran to coordinate with allied militias across Iraq and Yemen simultaneously. This was not just a military response. This was not just a diplomatic statement. This was a full-spectrum strategic recalibration. This was deterrence in its most complete and unmistakable form. And deterrence is the one thing Iran has struggled to overcome since the collapse of the nuclear deal in 2018. For every advance Iran has made in enrichment capability and regional proxy power, the Western alliance has countered with something that complicates Tehran's calculations further. Remember, Iran thought that political divisions in Washington would prevent a unified response. They thought that war fatigue in Europe would slow NATO coordination. They thought that the ongoing crisis in Gaza would distract American attention and resources away from the Iranian nuclear file. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Washington responded within hours. European allies issued coordinated statements of support. And Israeli intelligence reportedly shared real-time data with coalition partners faster than at any point in the last decade. What makes this moment so critical and so dangerous is that Khamenei's announcement came at a time when he is under enormous internal pressure. Hardliners within the Revolutionary Guard want escalation and confrontation. Reformist voices want negotiation and economic relief. The Iranian public wants stability and an end to crippling sanctions. And regional proxy leaders want continued support and resources for their own conflicts across the Middle East. Khamenei is balancing all these demands while managing an economy under severe strain. And when leaders in that position make sudden dramatic public moves, they are not doing it from a position of strength. They are doing it from pressure. They are doing it from vulnerability. They are doing it because internal dynamics have left them with no quiet options remaining. The three demands announced today were not just directed at the West. They were directed inward, at domestic audiences who need to see strength and defiance from their supreme leader during a moment of national uncertainty and economic hardship. The White House statement, now distributed through every major diplomatic channel, was designed to signal clearly that Washington is not willing to allow Iran to use maximalist demands as leverage to reshape the regional security architecture. Senior officials said plainly that Iran's demands were inconsistent with the established framework for spatial nuclear non-proliferation. That is diplomatic language, for we will never accept these terms, and you know it. You do not hear that tone from Washington unless something very serious is at stake. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister addressed his security cabinet in a brief but forceful speech tonight. He said, "We have heard Iran's words, and we have watched Iran's actions." He said, "Israel will not wait for threats to become realities." And he said, "Our response will be measured by our capabilities, not by our patience." These are not rhetorical flourishes designed for media consumption. These are statements from a nation that understands exactly how high the stakes have become in this moment. Here is what makes the situation even more concerning. Iran's announcement was not isolated. Along with Khamenei's three demands, Hezbollah leadership in Lebanon also issued statements of solidarity and readiness. Houthi forces in Yemen increased maritime threats in the Red Sea within hours of the broadcast. And Iranian-backed militias in Iraq launched a series of rocket attacks targeting coalition bases, all within the same 24-hour window. When Iran moves multiple pieces simultaneously, it means something much larger is underway. Analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Iran is preparing for a new round of aggressive nuclear enrichment to create maximum leverage before any future negotiations. Another is that Iran is attempting to fracture the Western coalition by presenting demands they know will be rejected, thereby justifying further escalation to domestic audiences. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Iran is attempting to establish a new strategic reality on the ground before anyone can respond diplomatically. But today, the coalition took that option off the table. They did not wait for United Nations deliberation. They did not defer to slow diplomatic processes. They did not issue gentle statements of concern. They moved assets, activated intelligence networks, and demonstrated capability in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. What we are watching now is a test of resolve. Iran wants to see how far it can push. The West wants to show that the boundaries are firm and the consequences are real. Tonight, we have heard from senior intelligence officials who are now monitoring Iranian military movements in real time around the clock. They say that Iranian naval assets have begun repositioning in patterns consistent with defensive postures. They say internal communications suggest Tehran did not expect this speed of response. And they say that Khamenei's decision to make these demands publicly is likely part of a broader strategy intended to rally domestic support while testing international boundaries before any potential negotiations begin. But the coalition is not backing down. In fact, the coalition is leaning forward. Their response today, swift, unified, and strategically precise, sent a message to Tehran that the era of testing without consequences is over. And it sent a message to the broader international community that the Western alliance, despite its internal disagreements, remains capable of acting together when the stakes demand it. This is the message that will echo through diplomatic halls and military command centers for weeks to come. As the coming days unfold, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Iran hoped to achieve with these three demands. But what we do know tonight is that the Western response was timely. It prevented Iran from controlling the narrative. It reassured regional allies who were watching nervously. And it re-established deterrence at a moment when deterrence was in danger of eroding. What happens next will depend entirely on what Tehran does in the next 48 to 72 hours. If Iran steps back from these demands and returns to back-channel negotiations, this moment will be remembered as a turning point that brought both sides closer to a realistic framework. If Iran doubles down and escalates further, the coalition has already shown that they are positioned, prepared, and ready to respond with overwhelming coordination. They have shown they are not bluffing. They have shown they are ready for whatever comes next in this rapidly evolving and deeply consequential situation. And tonight, for the first time in months, Tehran appears to be recalculating. The Revolutionary Guard headquarters is quiet, too quiet. And when Iran is quiet, it means they are thinking. It means they are choosing their next move very carefully. Because tonight, the supreme leader learned something that history has taught many leaders before him. That demands without leverage are just words. That unity is stronger than intimidation. And that the world is watching every single move. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is absolutely clear. The three demands have been heard. The response has been delivered. And the next move belongs to Tehran. And we will be here, watching every detail, tracking every development. As the next phase of this critical moment in history unfolds before our eyes. Stay informed, stay aware. And we will see you in the next update. Goodbye for now.